The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward like the inside of a cathedral made of light. Pillars of crystal rose from the floor and disappeared into a ceiling so high that clouds of pale mist gathered there. Hundreds of seats carved from strange metals and glowing stones formed a circle around a central platform. In those seats sat beings from across the known universe. Some had scales. Some had fur. Some were made of shapes that hurt to look at for too long. They had come from 1,000 worlds to witness what the Veilkith had promised would be an important lesson for the Galaxy. Ambassador Megan Torres stood on the central platform with her small delegation of humans. She was a tall woman in her early 50s with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too many difficult negotiations. She wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. Behind her stood 3 aides and 1 man who was not a diplomat at all. His name was Danny Callahan. He was 34 years old, with broad shoulders and hands that showed years of hard work. He had a calm face and quiet eyes. He stood with his feet slightly apart, watching everything around him without seeming to watch anything at all. Back on Earth, he had been a structural engineer. He had also been a soldier in wars fought in mountains and deserts. He had pulled survivors from collapsed buildings in countries whose names most people could not pronounce. He was not a hero in the way movies showed heroes. He was simply a man who had learned long ago that life would knock you down and that the only thing you could do was stand back up. High Commander Zyrith of the Veilkith rose from his seat. He was nearly 8 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood. His eyes were gold with vertical pupils like a snake. When he moved, the muscles beneath his scales rippled with obvious power. The Veilkith were known throughout the galaxy as the greatest warriors. They had conquered 17 star systems before joining the Council. They believed in strength above all things. "We have gathered here today," Zyrith said in a voice that rumbled like stones grinding together, "to determine the proper classification of the species known as humans." Megan stepped forward. "High Commander, we have submitted our application for Category 1 membership. We have provided all required documentation regarding our technology, our society, and our intentions." Zyrith made a sound that might have been laughter. Documentation means nothing. Paper cannot show the truth of what a species really is. We have studied your kind, Ambassador. We have measured your bodies and tested your physical capabilities. You are small. Your bones break easily. Your skin tears. You cannot survive in vacuum. You cannot breathe underwater. You live for less than 100 of your years, which is barely more than childhood for most species here. A murmur went through the assembled delegates. Some of them nodded their heads or moved their tentacles or flashed colors of agreement. "Based on our assessment," Zyrith continued, "the Veilkith formally request that humanity be classified as a Category 7 species. The lowest tier. You would be granted protectorate status. Your ships would be confined to your home system. You would have no voting rights in this council. You would exist under our protection, like children who cannot care for themselves." Megan felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "And if we refuse this classification?" "You may challenge it," Zyrith said. "That is your right under galactic law. But the challenge requires proof. A single human must face our trials. 3 tests designed to measure the true worth of a species. If your representative passes, you will be granted the classification you seek. If your representative fails, you will accept Category 7 status and Earth will become a protectorate of the Veilkith Empire." The chamber buzzed with excitement. The Veilkith trials were famous. They had been used for centuries to put lesser species in their place. No one who had faced them had ever succeeded. The trials were designed to break bodies and crush spirits. They were designed to prove that some species were simply better than others. "What are these trials?" Megan asked. Zara smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. The first trial tests pain tolerance. The second tests environmental endurance. The third tests combat ability. Your representative must face all three. Failure in any trial means defeat for your entire species. And if our representative dies, then humanity will learn its place in the natural order. Megan turned to look at her delegation. Her aides were pale with fear. They were good people, but they were diplomats. They had spent their lives in meeting rooms and offices. They were not built for what was being asked. Danny Callahan stepped forward. I will do it. The chamber went silent for a moment. Then the Veilkith began to laugh. Other species joined in with their own sounds of amusement. Clicking and whistling and deep rumbling filled the air. They looked at this average human male with his ordinary body and saw nothing that impressed them. Zereth leaned forward. You are not even a soldier anymore. Our scans show old injuries. Bones that have been broken and healed. You walk with a slight limp on cold mornings. You are damaged goods even by human standards. Danny met the alien's golden eyes without looking away. I have been broken before. I am still here. Bravery or stupidity? We shall see which one it is. Zyrith waved his clawed hand. The trials will begin tomorrow. I suggest you rest, little human. Enjoy your last night as a complete being. The council session ended and the delegates began to file out. Megan grabbed Danny's arm as they walked toward their quarters. Danny, you do not have to do this. We can negotiate. We can find another way. He shook his head. There is no other way. They need to see what humans really are. They think they know us because they measured our bones and counted our years. But they do not know anything about us. They do not know what we carry inside. And what is that? Danny looked out a window at the strange stars of an alien sky. They do not know that we come from a world that has been trying to kill us since the day we climbed down from the trees. They do not know about the ice ages we survived or the predators we outlasted. They do not know that we used to chase animals across open plains until they collapsed from exhaustion, just so we could eat. They measure us against their own kind and think we are weak. But they have never seen what a human can do when giving up is not an option. Megan studied his face. There was no fear there. Only a quiet certainty that she had seen before and people who had faced the worst and come out the other side. Get some sleep, she said finally. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Danny nodded and walked to his small room. He lay down on the strange alien bed and closed his eyes. He did not think about pain or death or failure. He thought about his grandfather, who had worked in coal mines for 40 years and never complained. He thought about his mother, who had raised 3 kids alone after his father left and still managed to smile every morning. He thought about every human who had ever faced something impossible and decided to face it anyway. Tomorrow he would show them what humanity was made of, and the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The arena was larger than any stadium on Earth. It was built into the heart of a hollowed-out moon that orbited the Council's homeworld. Seats rose in endless rows toward a ceiling that showed the stars through transparent panels. Over 50,000 beings had come in person to watch the trials. Billions more watched through holographic broadcasts that reached across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, creatures of every shape and size gathered around screens to witness what they believed would be the humiliation of humanity. Danny Callahan walked across the arena floor. His footsteps echoed in the vast space. He wore simple clothing, a gray shirt and dark pants. Nothing special. Nothing that marked him as anything other than ordinary. The delegates in the stands looked down at him like spectators at an ancient Roman Colosseum waiting for a gladiator to fall. High Commander. Zyrith stood on a raised platform at the edge of the arena. His scales caught the light as he raised his arms for silence. "Citizens of the galaxy," he announced, his voice amplified to fill every corner of the moon. "Today, we begin the trials that will determine the worth of humanity. The first trial is the test of pain tolerance. This is the most basic measure of any species. A creature that cannot endure suffering is a creature that cannot survive." A machine descended from the ceiling. It was a simple device, a metal ring attached to wires and tubes. Danny watched it come down without moving. "This is the neural agonizer," Xyrith explained. "It connects directly to the nervous system and activates every pain receptor in the body at once. There is no injury. There is no damage. There is only pure pain, the kind that makes you wish for death. Most species collapse within 5 seconds. The Vilekith record for endurance is 47 seconds, held by our greatest warrior. If the human cannot surpass 10 seconds, he fails the trial." Danny looked at the device. "Put it on." A Vilekith technician approached and fastened the ring around Danny's forearm. The metal was cold against his skin. He could feel it connecting to his nerves, tiny needles finding their way to the places where pain lived. "When you cannot take any more," Xyrith said, "simply fall to your knees and beg for it to stop. We will show mercy. We are not monsters." Danny said nothing. He planted his feet firmly on the ground and took a slow breath. The device activated. It felt like every nerve in his body caught fire at the same moment. It felt like being burned and frozen and torn apart all at once. It felt like nothing he had ever experienced before, and Danny had experienced a lot. He had been shot. He had been caught in an explosion that left shrapnel in his back. He had fallen 3 stories and broken his leg in 2 places. None of that compared to this. His body went rigid. Every muscle locked tight. His vision went wide around the edges. Somewhere far away, he could hear his own heart pounding like a drum. The crowd watched with eager eyes. Some of them leaned forward in their seats. They wanted to see the human fall. They wanted to watch him break. 5 seconds passed. Danny did not fall. His hands curled into fists so tight that his nails cut into his palms. His jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. But he stayed on his feet. 10 seconds. A murmur went through the crowd. This was longer than expected. Perhaps the device was not working correctly. Perhaps humans simply did not feel pain the way other species did. 20 seconds. Xyrith's smile began to fade. He looked at the technician, who checked the device and nodded. Everything was working. The human was experiencing the full effect. He should have collapsed long ago. 30 seconds. Danny's breathing came in short, sharp gasps. Sweat poured down his face. His shirt was soaked through. His eyes were squeezed shut, and the veins in his neck stood out like cords. But he did not fall. He did not beg. 40 seconds. The arena had gone completely silent. No one was laughing now. No one was making bets on how quickly the human would break. They were all watching with something that looked like the beginning of fear. 40-7 seconds. The Vilekith record was matched. And still Danny stood. Inside his mind, Danny was somewhere else. He was back in that collapsed building in Turkey, buried under tons of concrete with a broken leg and no way out. He had laid there for 16 hours before rescue came. 16 hours of pain and darkness and the certainty that he was going to die. But he had not died. He had focused on breathing. He had focused on staying alive 1 second at a time. He had learned that pain was just a signal, just information. It could not kill you unless you let it. 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. The crowd was making sounds now, but they were not sounds of amusement. They were sounds of disbelief. Some delegates rose from their seats. Others whispered to each other in languages that humans had never heard. Danny opened his eyes. He looked directly at High Commander Xyrith. Blood ran from his nose and the corners of his eyes, but his gaze was steady. His voice came out rough and broken, barely more than a whisper, but the microphones in the arena picked it up and broadcast it across the galaxy. Was that supposed to hurt? Xyrith stared at him for a long moment. Then he signaled for the device to be turned off. The pain stopped. Danny's body sagged, and for a moment it looked like he might fall. But he caught himself. He straightened his spine. He stood tall. The arena erupted in chaos. Delegates were shouting, arguing, demanding explanations. The Valkith technicians were checking their equipment over and over, certain that something must have gone wrong. But nothing had gone wrong. The human had simply refused to break. Ambassador Megan Torres was on her feet in the viewing box reserved for the human delegation. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. She had known Danny was tough. She had not known he was this tough. "The first trial is complete," Xyrith announced, his voice strained. "The human has passed." He said nothing else. There was nothing else to say. As Danny walked off the arena floor, a young Valkith warrior approached him. The warrior looked at Danny with an expression that was hard to read. "How?" the warrior asked. "How did you not fall?" Danny wiped the blood from his face with the back of his hand. "Where I come from, we have a saying. Pain is temporary. Giving up lasts forever." The warrior did not understand. How could anyone accept pain like that and keep going? How could a creature so small and soft possess such stubbornness? Danny kept walking. He did not look back. In the viewing box, Xyrith watched the human leave. For the first time since the trials began, he felt something cold growing in his chest. It was not fear exactly. It was worse than fear. It was the terrible suspicion that he and his people had made a serious mistake. They had looked at humanity and seen only weakness. They had measured bodies and counted years and calculated strength. They had not measured what lived inside. And now, as Danny Callahan walked away with blood on his face and fire in his eyes, the High Commander of the Valkith Empire began to wonder what else they had missed. 2 trials remained. And suddenly, Xyrith was not so certain of the outcome. The second trial took place the following day. Danny had spent the night recovering in a medical bay where alien doctors studied him with more curiosity than concern. They scanned his body and shook their heads at what they found. Scar tissue everywhere. Old breaks that had healed slightly wrong. A body that had been damaged and repaired so many times that it told the story of a life spent testing its own limits. One doctor, a being with 6 arms and eyes like black pools, asked Danny if humans were always this broken. Danny had smiled and said that the broken ones were usually the strongest. Now he stood before a massive chamber made of reinforced glass and unknown metals. It was called the Crucible. Inside that chamber, the conditions could be changed to match any environment in the known galaxy. Burning deserts, frozen wastelands, the vacuum of space, the crushing depths of alien oceans. Species that wished to prove their worth had to survive whatever the chamber threw at them. High Commander Xyrith stood before the crowd with his claws clasped behind his back. His confidence had returned overnight. The pain trial had been a surprise, but surely this would be different. Humans came from a single world with a narrow range of temperatures. They could not possibly endure what the Crucible had in store. The second trial tests environmental endurance, Xyrith announced. The human will face 3 conditions: extreme heat, extreme cold, and oxygen deprivation. He must remain conscious through all 3. If he falls unconscious or begs for relief, he fails. Danny stepped into the chamber. The door sealed behind him with a heavy thud. He stood in the center of the space and waited. "First condition," Xyrith said. Heat. The temperature began to rise. It climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then 120, then 140. The air shimmered. The walls seemed to glow with thermal energy. Most species would have collapsed within minutes. Their bodies were simply not designed for such extremes. Danny closed his eyes and focused on his breathing. He had worked construction in Arizona summers, where the temperature reached 115 in the shade. He had run missions in desert countries, where the midday sun could cook a man alive inside his own helmet. Heat was an old enemy. He knew how to fight it. He stripped off his shirt and sat down on the floor with his legs crossed. He let the sweat pour off his body, knowing that evaporation was his friend. He kept his movements slow and deliberate. He did not waste energy. He simply endured. 20 minutes passed. The Veilkith observers checked their instruments with growing disbelief. The human's body temperature had risen, but not as much as expected. His heart rate was elevated but stable. He showed no signs of organ failure or heat stroke. In the stands, a scientist from a species called the Morthax leaned toward his colleague. The Morthax were scholars who studied life forms across the galaxy. "Fascinating," he whispered. Their species evolved as persistence hunters. They would chase prey across open savannas until the prey collapsed from heat exhaustion. Humans are one of the best heat regulation organisms in the galaxy. They sweat through their skin rather than panting. Remarkable adaptation. Xyrith heard this and his jaw tightened. He had not known. His people had measured human bodies, but had not bothered to study human history. "Second condition," he ordered. Cold. The heat vanished instantly. The temperature plummeted like a stone dropped from a cliff. Within seconds, the chamber was colder than the worst winter on Earth. Frost formed on the walls. The air turned to fog with every breath Danny took. Danny curled his body into a tight ball. He tucked his hands under his arms and pressed his knees to his chest. He began to shiver violently, his muscles contracting and releasing to generate heat. This was harder than the heat. Humans were tropical creatures originally. They had not evolved for cold, but they had learned to survive it anyway. Danny thought about his great-grandmother, who had grown up in northern Minnesota during the Depression. She used to tell stories about winters so cold that birds would freeze in the air and fall from the sky. Her family had survived in a house with walls so thin you could see daylight through the cracks. They had huddled together for warmth and stuffed newspaper into their clothes for insulation. They had kept moving, kept working, kept living, because stopping meant dying. 15 minutes in the cold. Danny's lips turned blue. His shivering became almost violent. But he did not lose consciousness. He did not beg for relief. The Morthax scientist was speaking again. Humans spread across their entire planet. They lived in every environment, from tropical jungles to Arctic tundra. They did not wait for evolution to adapt their bodies. They adapted their behavior instead. They built shelters. They made fire. They created clothing from animal skins. They are not specialists. They are generalists. And generalists survive where specialists fail. Xyrith's claws dug into the railing before him. This was not going as planned. "Third condition," he growled. "Oxygen deprivation." The cold began to fade, but the air grew thin. The oxygen level in the chamber dropped from 21% to 15%, then to 12%, then to 9%. This was the equivalent of climbing a mountain 3 times the height of Everest. Most species would lose consciousness within minutes. Danny's movements slowed. His vision blurred around the edges. Every breath felt like trying to suck air through a wet cloth. His head pounded and his thoughts became muddy and confused. But he kept breathing. Slow and steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He had trained at high-altitude facilities. He had climbed mountains where every step felt like torture. He knew that the body could adapt if you gave it time. He knew that panic was the real enemy. Panic made you breathe faster, waste oxygen, accelerate your own death. So he did not panic. He sat very still and focused on staying alive, one breath at a time. 10 minutes passed. The chamber door opened. Danny rose to his feet. His legs shook and his vision swam, but he walked out of the crucible under his own power. He did not need to be carried. He did not need assistance. The arena was silent for a long moment. Then, somewhere in the crowd, a single being began to make a sound. It was not applause exactly, because many species did not have hands to clap. But it was a sound of respect, of acknowledgement. And slowly, it spread through the arena until thousands of voices joined together in recognition of what they had witnessed. Ambassador Megan Torres was waiting for Danny at the edge of the arena floor. She wrapped a thermal blanket around his shoulders and looked into his exhausted eyes. 2 down, she said quietly. 1 to go. Danny nodded slowly. His body ached in ways he could not describe. But he was still standing. That was all that mattered. Across the arena, High Commander Xyrith watched the human walk away. His confidence was gone now, replaced by something darker. If the human survived the final trial, everything would change. The balance of power in the galaxy would shift. Other species would see what humans could do and would no longer see them as weak. There was only one option left. The final trial would be combat, and Xyrith had already decided that he would face the human himself. One of them would not walk away. The arena fell silent as High Commander Xyrith stepped onto the fighting floor. He had removed his ceremonial armor and stood now in simple combat wrappings that left his scaled arms and legs bare. His muscles rippled beneath his red-brown scales. His claws extended to their full length, each one sharp enough to cut through steel plating. He was nearly 8 feet tall and weighed over 400 pounds. He had killed more enemies in personal combat than most warriors killed in a lifetime. Danny Callahan stood at the opposite end of the arena. He was 5'11" and weighed 180 pounds. He had slept only 4 hours and his body still ached from the previous trials. The medical staff had offered him stimulants and pain blockers, but he had refused them all. He wanted to face this challenge with a clear head. The final trial is combat, Xyrith announced, his voice carrying across the silent arena. No weapons, no armor, no rules. The fight ends when one of us yields or dies. He paused and looked at Danny with his golden eyes. I give you one chance, human. Withdraw now, and your species will be granted Category 5 status. Not full membership, but better than what you would have received. You have proven your worth. There is no shame in recognizing a superior opponent. Danny shook his head slowly. I did not come here to accept second place. Xyrith smiled, showing all of his teeth. Then you came here to die. He charged out. The Velkith moved faster than anything that Psi should have been able to move. He crossed the distance between them in 3 massive strides and swung his clawed hand in an arc. That would have taken Danny's head off his shoulders. Danny ducked. The claws passed so close to his face that he felt the wind of their passage. He rolled to the side and came up in a crouch, already moving, already looking for his next position. Xyrith spun and attacked again. This time, his claws found flesh. 3 deep gashes opened across Danny's chest, spilling blood onto the arena floor. The crowd gasped. Some of them cheered. First blood had been drawn, and it belonged to the human. Danny stumbled backward, one hand pressed against his wounds. The pain was intense. The pain was an old friend by now. He kept his eyes on Xyrith, watching the way the alien moved, looking for patterns. Your blood is red, Xyrith observed. A beautiful color. I will paint this arena with it. He attacked again, faster this time. A flurry of slashes and strikes that drove Danny across the floor. More wounds opened. A gash on Danny's arm. a cut above his eye that sent blood streaming down his face, a deep slice across his thigh that made him stagger. The crowd watched with hungry eyes. This was what they had come to see. This was the natural order asserting itself. The weak would fall before the strong. The universe would make sense again. Danny fell to one knee. Blood pooled beneath him. His vision blurred and his lungs burned. Xyrath loomed over him, claws raised for the killing blow. "Yield," the Valkith commanded. "Yield and I will let you live as a reminder to your species of their proper place." Danny looked up at him. Blood ran down his face and dripped from his chin. His body screamed at him to stop, to give up, to accept defeat. But somewhere deep inside him, a voice spoke. It was his grandfather's voice, rough from decades of coal dust. It was his mother's voice, tired but unbroken after working double shifts to keep food on the table. It was the voice of every human who had ever been told they were not good enough and had refused to believe it. "No," Danny said. He exploded upward. His fist connected with the soft tissue under Xyrath's jaw. The alien's head snapped back. Danny pressed forward, ignoring the agony in his wounded leg, and drove his elbow into Xyrath's throat. The Valkith staggered, gasping for air. Danny did not stop. He could not stop. Stopping meant dying. He attacked the joints, the eyes, the throat, every vulnerable point that his training had taught him to find. He was not stronger than Xyrath. He was not faster, but he was relentless. Every time the Valkith knocked him down, he got back up. Every time those terrible claws tore into his flesh, he came back swinging. The crowd had gone quiet. They were not watching a battle anymore. They were watching something else. Something they did not have a word for. Xyrath threw Danny across the arena. The human crashed into the wall and slid to the floor. He lay there for a moment, broken and bleeding, and the Valkith began to laugh. "Finally," Xyrath said, breathing hard. "Finally you understand. You are nothing. You are prey. You are—" Danny got up. The laughter died in Xyrath's throat. He stared at the human, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. No one got up after that. No one could get up after that. But Danny was standing. He was swaying on his feet, one eye swollen shut, blood covering his body like war paint. But he was standing. "Is that all you have?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Something changed in Xyrath's eyes. The arrogance faded. The contempt disappeared. What replaced it was something the High Commander of the Valkith had not felt in a very long time. Fear. They fought again. Danny was slower now, but he was still moving, still fighting. He dodged a killing strike and countered with a kick to Xyrath's knee. The alien roared in pain and stumbled. Danny grabbed one of those deadly clawed hands and twisted, using leverage instead of strength. Bones cracked. Xyrath screamed. Danny pressed his advantage. He could not overpower the Valkith, but he could outlast him. He could keep hurting him, keep wearing him down, keep refusing to die. Minutes passed. Both combatants were bleeding now. Both were wounded, but only one of them was slowing down. Xyrath fell to one knee. His breathing was ragged. His eyes were unfocused. He had never fought this long. He had never faced an opponent who simply would not stop. Danny stood over him, barely able to remain upright. Blood dripped from his fingertips and splattered on the floor. "Yield," Danny said. For a long moment, nothing happened. The arena held its breath. The galaxy held its breath. Then High Commander Xyrath, the greatest warrior of the Valkith Empire, the terror of 17 star systems, lowered his head. "I yield." The words echoed across the arena, across the stars, across 1,000 watching worlds. And in that moment, everything changed. Danny swayed on his feet. His vision was going dark. He had given everything he had. pushed his body far beyond its limits. He felt hands catching him as he fell. He heard voices shouting for medical help. But none of that mattered. He had won. Humanity had won. And as consciousness slipped away, Danny smiled. They had called his species weak. They had looked at human bodies and seen only fragility. They had not understood that strength was not measured in scales or claws or size. Strength was measured in the refusal to quit. And in that measure, humans were stronger than anyone had ever imagined. Danny woke up 3 days later in a medical facility that looked like something from a dream. The walls were made of soft light that changed color with his mood. Machines hummed quietly around him, doing things to his body that he could not understand. When he tried to sit up, gentle hands pushed him back down. "Rest," Ambassador Megan Torres said, sitting beside his bed. "You have earned it." Danny looked down at himself. His wounds were mostly healed. Pink scars already forming where deep gashes had been just days before. Alien medicine was far beyond anything on Earth. "Did we win?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Megan smiled. "We won. The Council voted unanimously. Humanity has been granted Category 1 status. Full membership in the Interstellar Compact. Full voting rights. Full access to trade routes and technology exchanges. Everything we asked for and more." Danny closed his eyes and let out a long breath. It was over. The trials were finished. Humanity had proven itself. "There is more," Megan continued. "Word of what you did has spread across the galaxy. Every species with access to a broadcast feed watched you fight. They watched you refuse to give up. They watched you stand up when you should have stayed down." She paused, and Danny could hear the emotion in her voice. "You have become a symbol, Danny, not just for humanity, but for every species that has ever been called weak. Every species that has ever been underestimated. They are looking at you and seeing something they did not know was possible." Danny opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. He had not asked to be a symbol. He had just done what needed to be done. "The Valkithai commander," he said. "Zyrith, is he all right?" Megan nodded slowly. "He survived. He's recovering in another wing of this facility. He has not spoken to anyone since the fight." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed himself up, ignoring the protests from his healing body. "I need to see him." Megan did not try to stop him. She helped him to his feet and supported him as he walked through the gleaming corridors of the medical center. Other patients watched him pass. Some of them were species he did not recognize. Some of them bowed their heads as he went by. Danny ignored them all. He found Zyrith in a private room at the end of a long hallway. The Valkith was lying on a bed that had been specially designed for his massive frame. His scales had lost some of their luster, and bandages covered many of his wounds. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. When Danny entered, Zyrith's golden eyes tracked toward him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I came to apologize," Danny said finally. Zyrith made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. "Apologize? You defeated me in front of the entire galaxy. You humiliated my people. And you come to apologize? I did not fight you to humiliate anyone. I fought you because I had to. Because my people needed me to." Danny moved closer to the bed. "You are a warrior. You understand duty. You understand doing what must be done, even when it costs everything you have." Zyrith was silent for a long time. The anger in his eyes slowly faded, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "I have fought many opponents," the Valkith said quietly. "I have killed more enemies than I can count. But I have never faced anyone like you. When you fell, you got back up. When you were bleeding and broken, you kept fighting. When you should have been dead, you stood over me and demanded my surrender." He shook his head slowly. We measured your species and found you lacking. We looked at your bodies and saw weakness. We did not understand what we were seeing. What were you seeing? Xyrath met his eyes. We were seeing survivors. We were seeing a species that had earned every breath through struggle and sacrifice. We looked at your short lives and saw fragility. We should have seen intensity. You burn bright because you burn fast. And that makes you dangerous in ways we did not imagine. Danny sat down in the chair beside the bed. His body still ached despite the advanced healing technology. Some wounds went deeper than flesh. We do not want to be dangerous, he said. We want to be partners, allies, friends. Xyrath was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand, the one that Danny had broken during their fight. It was wrapped in bandages and healing slowly. On my world, Xyrath said, warriors who face each other in honorable combat become bonded. They share a connection that nothing can break. They are no longer enemies. They are brothers in battle. Danny looked at the offered hand. Then he reached out and took it. The Valkith's grip was firm despite his injuries. Among humans, Danny said, we have a similar tradition. When two fighters respect each other, they shake hands. It means the battle is over. It means we start fresh. Xyrath nodded slowly. Then let us start fresh. Your species and mine. Perhaps we have more in common than I thought. When Danny left the room, he felt lighter than he had in days. The weight of the trials was finally lifting from his shoulders. The formal ceremony took place 1 week later in the great chamber of the Galactic Council. Danny stood beside Ambassador Torres as the Watcher, the eldest member of the council, addressed the assembly. We have made errors in our judgment of humanity, the Watcher declared. Its form of pure energy pulsed with each word. We measured their bodies and found them fragile. We measured their lifespans and found them brief. We measured their technology and found it primitive. But we failed to measure the one thing that truly matters. The Watcher turned its attention to Danny. We failed to measure their spirit, their refusal to yield, their ability to endure what would destroy others, not because they do not feel pain, but because they have learned to carry it. They come from a world that has tested them constantly, and they have passed every test. They are not weak. They are forged in fire, and they have earned their place among us. The assembly voted. One by one, every species in the gallery cast their support for humanity's full membership. Even the Valkith, represented now by a new commander, voted yes. When it was done, Danny stepped forward to address the council. He had not prepared a speech. He did not know what to say. But when he opened his mouth, the words came on their own. We do not want to be feared, he said. We want to be understood. We are small, and we die young, and our bodies break easily. But we get back up. We always get back up. That is what makes us human. And if you give us a chance, we will stand beside you as partners. We will face whatever challenges the universe throws at us, and we will not quit. We will not surrender. We will not stop until the job is done. He paused and looked around at the thousands of alien faces watching him. That is our promise to you. That is what humanity offers. Not strength of body, but strength of will. And that is the one thing we will never run out of. The council erupted in sounds of approval from 100 different species and across the galaxy. On a little blue world called Earth, billions of humans looked up at the stars and knew that their place in the universe had changed forever. They were no longer alone. They were no longer weak. They were exactly what they had always been: survivors.